Welcome to the Richmond Film Network podcast, your all-access pass to the world of independent cinema. Each week, we go beyond the credits and sit down with the creatives who turn vision into reality. Tune in weekly to find out who's on the RFN pod.
Welcome to the Richmond Film Network podcast, where we explore the people and the stories shaping independent film. Today, we're joined by two remarkable guests, filmmaker Thandi Cai and historian Emerald Dunn, who together have created the powerful new feature documentary, Bluff City Chinese, which made its Virginia premiere at RFN Indie Fest on May 17th. The film uncovers the 150-year history of Chinese immigrants in Memphis, Tennessee, weaving together personal stories, community oral histories, and archival research to build a tapestry of identity, belonging, and resilience. Welcome, Thandi and Emmy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Emmy, it's great to see you again. Of course, we were happy to have you in Richmond to represent the film, and you have such a presence and made quite an impression on our community. So it was a really special touch to have you there.
Thank you so much.
So Thandi, you've described Bluff City Chinese as a love letter to your younger self and a call to future generations. Can you talk about how your personal experience growing up in Memphis shaped the vision for this film?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think growing up in Memphis, my parents were of a different generation than the generations of Chinese Americans that we cover in the film. And because of that, they kind of immigrated to the US later on. Whereas the people that the history that we're trying to cover is people who immigrated to Memphis much earlier than my timeline. So 150 years ago, who were those Chinese Americans coming to Memphis? And the reason why I think I can connect that to my upbringing in Memphis is that as a kid, I wasn't educated on that history. And therefore, growing up, I kind of lost that confidence in myself, or a confidence that I belonged in Memphis and belonged in my environment. And so when we were making the documentary, I really wanted to address that feeling through the graphics, through the archival material, and the storytelling. So that's sort of a high-level glance at your question.
And Emmy, you've spent years independently researching the Chinese community in the Mid-South. What first sparked your interest in uncovering these histories, and how has your perspective evolved over time?
Yes, I began my research after both my parents died. I moved back to Memphis. It wasn't intentionally I was searching this history. It just so happened that there is no history. When I asked at the library, just a couple of manila folders or a few newspaper clippings, and I just felt that the Chinese have been in Memphis for a long time. After all, there was a cemetery here. And so at that point, when I saw the two folders, I thought I should do something about this. And I was determined to find the year that the first settlers, immigrants, came to Memphis. After doing this research, I realized that this gave us history, but it also gives voice to the Cantonese settlers who came. And that's very important to me, to recognize the early ancestors who persevere and suffered through the 150 years that they were here.
So I understand that you all got connected during the pandemic. Can you explain the timelines and how you came to do this work together?
Yes, I love this story, actually. So I was living abroad. I was serving in the Peace Corps in Lesotho for some years. And then during the shelter-in-place initiative, I had to go back to Memphis to be with my family. And through that experience, I was really trying to figure out how I could be involved in my community and help with some of the issues that were taking place during the pandemic. As we all know, there was a huge rise in reported hate crimes against Asian Americans, and trying to process that and also process my experience living in a predominantly Black country in Lesotho for so long, and how I was perceived differently in that context, and then translating that to, mid-pandemic America, like what that was kind of a really wild time for me in terms of processing who I was. So I started working with the National Historical Society to sort of get more grounded in how what the story is about Asian Americans and especially Chinese Americans in Memphis. So through that work, it never really became a film until much later on. The first time that Emmy and I worked together, it was just to map some of the research that Emmy was doing. And then we kind of also worked on some blog post writing and some social media posts. And it didn't evolve into a film until maybe 1.5 years, maybe after we really started working together. Does that align with your memory, Emily?
Yes, it does. We thought we would do a series of oral interviews, and that sort of became the basis towards the film.
Exactly. Yeah. So Emmy was still doing these interviews to build on the research that she has been collecting. So kind of like as she's digging into the past, also trying to document what's happening in the present and trying to capture the stories of people who are in the older generation because we realized they're not going to be here for much longer. I was basically just following Emmy around with the camera and the voice recording. Emmy would ask questions and I would just sit there for hours and listen to the conversations. And then I started to learn more and kind of applied my own thinking to the collecting that we were doing. And then that kind of led to the documentary.
Thandi, you had mentioned balancing historical truth with your deeply personal narrative. Can you share an example of how you achieved that balance?
So we really relied heavily, of course, on Emerald's research. Emmy basically gave us a folder of all of the things that she had digitized, and we had to build on top of that folder and get more information that had not been digitized yet. And as I was processing this, I had to ask Emmy to also help teach some of the other members of the core team more about the history. So she would give us like these documents that were kind of like cliff notes on different topics or themes about the history. And then we would meet in her kitchen and we would do these sessions where she would kind of just go through the timelines and teach us these like mini history lessons, if you will. And then at the same time, Emmy and I would have these conversations about how we were relating to the history itself. And so that took the form of conversations in the car when we were going to collect an interview. And then I would just turn on the mic. And it was just this iteration of her sharing all the history and then doing work on my own, but also with Emmy to try to piece together, like, how is the legacy of this history impacting me? And so with that structure, I think some things came to light. Like if you think about the MSCA, what does the acronym stand for?
Mid-South Chinese Association.
Chinese, yes. But that was a good example of like learning about their experience and why they created the MSCA to sort of protect these local businesses in a time of turmoil and challenges with immigration policy and also general anti-Chinese sentiment. Learning about that also helped me understand as an adult and a young person growing up in Memphis that the organizing among these business owners is still happening and it's still really vibrant. And that gave me a lot of confidence to think, oh, if we can draw that connection for people, then I think they'll have a better appreciation of where we've been in the past. And then we can start to open up that conversation to other levels of not just within the Chinese community, how are we banding together to protect our own interests, but how can we also lift up other people in the city of Memphis? So that's just one example of like a thread that is very clearly followed through the film.
Emmy, what was your most surprising or moving story that you discovered during your research that you knew had to be included in the film?
Basically, I left the writing of the film to Thandi because I have lived so long with that history. My history is linear and I could not visualize how it could be brought to the screen. So once I saw the finished film, and I think the film pretty much describes the history, especially because I was mostly focused on the early history of the Chinese in Memphis. So I think that Thandi chose well the story of Wong Kop and Lam Soon. They were two very influential community leaders in the 1930s. Those two are very tragic figures, in fact. Lam Soon died at 33, and Wong Kop was convicted of opium and spent his time in the federal prison and was deported. So those, I think, were the two seminal events in the Memphis history.
The film feels both historical and contemporary at the same time. And I think that's a good point that Emmy mentions, is that, she left the crafting up to you, Thandi. So can you describe that approach to telling the story historically, contemporary, personally?
So I think it was really difficult because I understood that the work that Emmy has been putting into this research she is someone who doesn't leave any stone unturned and really works in her authenticity and her purpose. And so first, just really understanding that, and that every lesson or every story she was giving us was a gift. And to then with that understanding, and that's something I tried to coach with the other writers and the people who were helping me produce this film, is that every detail that you see is really important to someone. And so we just have to think about very intentionally, when we leave things out, why are we leaving those things out? And the things that we did want to include, really thinking through why should this matter to people, and how everything that we put in there has to relate to someone who's living and breathing today, and then also people who are trying to move into the future. So we would take these stories, put them together, and then continuously ask those questions to one another. So by we, I mean Sissa Wong, who was the executive producer and really just an amazing force in the writing room, and then our editor, Alex Splice Jones, and he was the story producer. And so both of their insights were really incredible, because Sissa is someone who works really well in making things really splashy. I guess she has a flair for a drama that I kind of also can learn from. And then Splice is outside of the community. So Sissa is Chinese American and from Memphis. Splice is Black. He's an editor from LA who's a mutual friend of mine. And so his insights coming from the outside were really interesting, and asking well, why do you think this would happen? Or he would maybe latch onto something that was really interesting to Splice's knowledge and background. But for us, it's that's not the context of the Chinese American story, for example. That perspective that you're giving is a little bit is based on storytelling that's not from the Chinese community, for example. That's based on your understanding because of stereotypes or something like that. So we had a lot of difficult conversations about those sort of things. And then, of course, a big part of the film was the arc of the civil rights movement and what we were experiencing during that time in Memphis. And that part was really difficult to write. And so what I did was I brought in consultants, so various friends, but also colleagues of mine who are really well versed in either sociology or history in this particular time period, or other writers and creators who are also dealing with difficult subject matters, where you don't want to neglect any part of the story, but you want to be able to hold really difficult narratives side by side in order to tell the full truth and the authenticity of that time period. So I'm really grateful to those people too, where I would just show them the writing, or I would show them that clip, and then just say thoughts. Just tell me honestly, what are you thinking? And then based on those discussions, we would kind of adjust or pull in different parts of the story to make it work more fluidly. But we didn't want to tell people what to think. We wanted to lead people to make their own conclusions. And that was really, I think, another objective and another goal that was really important to the process.
So the film talks about the Chinese community today and your experience, Thandi, as a young person, in addition to the Chinese from 150 years ago. The two of you together work on this project to bridge the generations. And at the start of the film, I love the part where you sit down together and are asked, what do you have in common? And then the answer breaks my heart. It's that both of you are from Memphis, but you felt that you had to leave to become who you needed to be. That idea that you didn't feel like you even belonged in the place that you were born. Can you talk about that?
I think it's very difficult to describe how a person of color or another ethnic group grows up or grew up in the South. It was difficult for me, but I knew I wanted to leave the South, and fortunately, I had the opportunity. And I was gone for almost 20 years. So when I came back, Memphis was different. People have moved on, but it's still very conservative here. But the main difference is that I have grown older and I can look back and sort of be above what had happened in the past. I know people who have left their hometowns in the South and vowed never to go back because it was a bad experience for them. But I came back because my parents got sick and eventually passed away, and I just stayed. So I think doing this, researching this history helped me because now I can feel a part of the history, the Memphis history. Although the hard part now is to get this history out about the Chinese to the general public. I mean, many people still do not realize that Chinese have been a part of the Memphis community. And so I've been giving presentations at various times trying to enlighten the public about this part of the history of Memphis.
I think what Emmy is saying is also what I've experienced through making this film. It is hard to look at the place that you're from and see that there's limitations for who you can grow into. And I think that doing the work of diving into this history is very healing. It really heals that part of me as well. And for me, like, part of why I wanted to leave was because of the way I express my gender and my sexual orientation, and not having a lot of representation or ability to express that safely in Memphis growing up, and not seeing like examples of that around me. And it wasn't until I left that I was like, oh, this is how I could be. Like, I can live my full self. It's just finding the right community and the right environment, as I'm sure a lot of people go through. I mean, we all go through this journey, and to some extent as we become adults. But for me, that was the experience that I have now started to question more, and to try to use the work that Emmy and I are doing together to heal that part of my life, while also trying to figure out, with the privilege that I had to leave and now the resources I have to tell this story, how can we make that different for other people? And I think I really look to Emmy, and I really appreciate her leadership and her guidance in this storytelling.
So I've been watching where Bluff City Chinese is going on the festival circuits, and specifically when you screen at museums, which I think is amazing, the perfect place to get this kind of movie and to share the story and to get the eyes on it that needs to see it. How has that been? Do you feel like it's making an impact the way that you want it to?
I think so. We had a good crowd at the National Civil Rights Museum. Most people who come give positive feedback. Most of the time they're surprised at this history. The Chinese people have really grateful for this history that has come out. Not only Chinese, but the other day, this Filipino guy said he was just so grateful that there is a film about Asians and this history. So there's been impact on different ways, different people. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest impact I've seen is within the Asian American community. And not only are they surprised, but they're like deeply touched, and will have shared with me that it's helped them see the older generations in their family differently. So their parents and their grandparents, and being able to understand them from a different perspective. but also being able to have compassion for themselves as well and the things that they experienced growing up in the South. And then I would say for the external audiences, we hear a lot of like, I had no idea. I had no idea. I'm really surprised to hear that this group of people existed in Memphis. And that's, of course, like, that's the first step, right? But I think what I'd like to see more of is to be able to not just know that it exists, but also start to create more meaningful conversations about how we can help each other live a better life, like having more solidarity across different ethnic groups and identity groups that sometimes we can feel really siloed in. But I would really like the film to start opening up more dialogue and think more about how can this methodology that Emmy's sort of created about, public ownership of history and archives, how can that be replicated for other groups of people as well?
I expected the Asian community to receive the film well. At the first, at the premiere at the Indie Memphis, there were a few Black people in the audience, and one young lady saw me later at another place, and she just said, "Oh, I just love your film. It just touched my heart." And the film can relate in different ways to different groups.
Absolutely. I've seen that when it screened in Richmond. I had several people share that with me. So, Emmy, with the research and the collecting that you've been doing, have there been any groups that have been helpful to or supportive of that research that maybe amplified that work in any way?
One group that reached out to me was this assisted living home. She wanted me to speak about the history of the Chinese, and that was well received. The Dixon Gallery, I will be speaking there. Just recently spoke at the local library here.
I feel like there's this large roster of organizations that want to work with Emmy and really want to benefit from her work, and she just like doesn't think about it like that. So I'm here to gas her up a little bit. But she's partnering with the 1882 Foundation, which is a really important organization based in DC, and they host conferences and academic forums to talk more about how we can tell the story of Chinese Americans in the US. So she's helping to organize this year's conference, which will be hosted in Memphis. She's also talked with or presented to the Tennessee Genealogical Society. Is that the name of
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yes, and she's currently working with the University of Central Arkansas Chinese Heritage Project, and she's been a really, really central figure to driving the success of that project, which is also based off of oral histories. And I think in addition to that, people are often reaching out to her to just also learn more about where their families come from. And I think that is also support in a way of just affirming that the work is really important. Those are just a couple of people that I didn't hear mentioned just now, but there's definitely more.
So, Emmy, can you explain your work with the Chinese Historical Society and Shelby County Historical Commission? What does your work there entail?
In 2016, Thandi's father and I organized the Chinese Historical Society of Memphis in the Mid-South. Thandi's father was born in Beijing, grew up there, and came to the United States in the 1980s.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, the 80s.
Okay. So he is actually an exception who is interested in local history. And for that reason, he wanted to preserve the Chinese heritage in Memphis. So at that time, I was already working on my research and not only researching the history of the Chinese, but also I do genealogy work that has spanned the Mississippi Delta, Memphis, and Arkansas. And through this genealogy work and through stories that I have put on our Facebook page, people have approached me asking for more details. The Shelby County Historical Commission is specifically targeting historical sites in Shelby County. Although when we approached them for the 2 historical markers, they approved our markers.
So what is next for Bluff City Chinese? Where is it screening next? And will it be streaming eventually? What is the life cycle for Bluff City Chinese?
Yeah, that's caught us at a really exciting time. We actually are currently officially just part of the New Day Films distribution cohort. So we just signed the contract last week and we're working on getting onboarded to that. So that's really exciting. So hopefully we'll be able to share links to purchase or screen the film through them. And then we're also currently screening every weekend, every Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago until the end of the summer, so end of August. And then we have a couple of community screenings coming up, but we haven't finalized the timelines for those. Otherwise, if people are interested to learn more, they can follow us at Bluff City Chinese on Instagram or Facebook, or they can sign up for our newsletter at bluffcitychinese.com. And we post all of the monthly updates on screenings and that sort of thing there. And then one other part that we're growing in is, in addition to the film, we're building an online archive that people can access. And that's something that we just started a few weeks ago as well. And we're working with an intern, Vivian Fan, who's also from Memphis. And she's helping us sort of get that off the ground. But more to come on that front.
That's very exciting. Can you repeat where people interested in following the story can find that information again?
So for the film, people can find updates and information about our upcoming screenings at Bluff City Chinese on Instagram and Facebook. And they can sign up for our newsletter at bluffcitychinese.com. And we send a monthly newsletter out with all of the information that people need in order to access the film. And then by the end of the year, we're going to be up and running on New Day Films, which is an educational distributor. And that's where you can purchase the film for screenings or things of that nature. And other than that, you can learn about my work at thandicai.com. That's my website. And things to come in the future are Fort Smith Film Festival in July, Toronto Liftoff Film Festival coming up soon. Sign up for our newsletter and follow us on socials to learn.
And Emmy, what's next for you? Are you following the film around?
I do try to go to the screenings. I feel it's very important to promote the film. And I like to meet the local Asian community.
Emmy is also organizing the Rural Chinatown Conference with 1882 Foundation, and that's going to be in mid-October in Memphis.
Thandi and Emmy, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your powerful insights and your story today. We certainly appreciate it, and thank you again for sharing the film with Richmond Film Network.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it was really nice talking to you. Thanks so much for having us.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Richmond Film Network podcast. Thanks to our guest and to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share. Tune in next week to see who's on the RFN pod. Until then, keep the cameras rolling.